Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 29 of Business Therapy. I'm Sam, and I'm here with John. Today, we're actually going to talk about our backgrounds and what brings us to be dispensing business therapy advice. So I think it's interesting to always pause and reflect on our own journey, and you guys can follow along about what brings us to the table to be able to offer conscious business advice. So we're going to go back and forth a little bit, and I'm going to ask some questions to Jonathan, then he's going to reverse and ask me some questions. So hopefully you guys get a little bit of better look at our background and where we're coming from. So Jonathan, in terms of following your journey of being able to have a perspective on conscious business, I guess give the audience a little bit of where you started your career.
I started my career in a very typical fashion of not having any idea what I want to do after school. Went to grad school or law school because didn't really know 100% what I wanted to invest my time into, but thought skills acquisition would be a good way to start. And then just followed whatever objective I thought most people thought I should be following. So that included getting to a law firm, trying to make partner as fast as possible, climbing the ranks of partnership, representing the most prestigious clients, whatever would be an outward indicia of success. And that was, I would say, phase one of my journey.
And just to orient us in time, how long did phase one take you to complete? And maybe did you complete it successfully? I know the answer, but
you're asking how old I am. So no. Phase one, I would say, took about 15 years, 15 years, and ended with me being unable to argue against the fact that I achieved every objective anyone would say that I should be aiming to achieve. And it didn't bring me the satisfaction that I thought it would. And
so it sounds like that's the inflection point where, because I have a similar story and we'll touch on that in a minute, where the idea of maybe doing business more consciously or bringing more mindfulness to business probably started to happen in your life. And maybe we zoom in on that point for a little bit and talk a little bit more about what was empty or what was hollow, because I think that's a pretty common conversation that people have, especially people who are on the fast track where they find a lot of professional success. So what did that look and feel like for you at that moment in time?
Well, when you're so frenetic in your activity and most of your time is spent with noise, it drowns out even the strongest voice you might have inside of you. And that includes a voice saying, maybe I don't want to do this, or maybe, this isn't bringing me the satisfaction I'd like, or maybe I never really thought about what would bring me satisfaction. And it's really hard to hear that voice when you're really driven and working on very, very hard objectives and think that you could control all outcomes. So then you start accounting for all possible outcomes. And, it really engages 100% of you when you're looking for achieving an objective, especially if it's not an objective that you set for yourself, in essence, because then it's a moving target because it's defined by other people's perception. So you could be very successful, but by any measure, but again, it's a moving target because you're letting it be defined by other people. I don't know if I just answered your question. But
it might have been, it might have answered part of it. So are you saying that in chasing objectives set by other people or just by external factors, you weren't finding after a certain point that just started to become less substantial for you? Or you started to, I guess,
no,
when was the
I'm
point
saying,
where you noticed it wasn't working for you spiritually,
I'm saying,
personally?
I'm saying I probably never would have noticed because
I see.
I was so engaged in achieving complicated objectives that were also being set by other people's perception. So, in any group, you could be a partner, but still say, okay, I'm a partner, but I don't have enough influence, or I'm a partner who has influence, but I exerted my influence and it wasn't successful in a way that I thought it would, or so there is no achieving it on some level. But I think I hit a level of success that said, whatever you set out to achieve, you hit it. And that kind of opened up a lot of space to say, okay, what now? What next? And then it starts making you think about like what you set out to do to begin with.
Yeah. And how did that, it's almost this, I don't want to characterize it from my perspective, but it's almost this crisis state is what you're describing, where you've got this space and you don't know where to go with it. Maybe describe how you were feeling at that time and what prompted you to maybe start exploring a different path.
Well, the problem, once you start questioning any aspect of your life, it has a cascading effect to every aspect of your life. So it's very hard to just localize it to my job. It starts playing a role in relationships. It plays a role in everything. And we always say there's no distinction between business and personal. It's because you're the same person wherever you go. So you're bringing that everywhere, and that energy, and the outside is influencing you similarly. And that engagement is the same no matter where you go. So I started questioning everything. And it did cause, as you said, a crisis state, because essentially I had to do the work that I should have done and that I would strongly recommend everyone do in school, or in the early stages of really defining yourself. Not I shouldn't say that, because you never constrain yourself by defining yourself, but really asking the question of purpose and what I like and why I'm here, and analyzing all of that so that you don't, or being aware of it, not analyzing, being aware of it so that you don't start pursuing something and taking action and finding yourself in a state where you don't know why you set off on that course.
Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead.
So the crisis state, it actually led to one night where I was, I just ended a relationship and was sitting in my apartment. And I remember this feeling of feeling the weight of every molecule in the apartment crushing me, like this utter loneliness or kind of being adrift. And it was almost like a total sense of I was being crushed down to the atomic level. And I happened to hear about Tonglen meditation, where you imagine everyone in the world who is feeling as you are. And then you realize you're never really alone. And you realize there's something beyond yourself. And I remember just having a catharsis at that moment. And that really set me on my course of mindfulness. And a specific book by Pema Chodron really influenced me very, very heavily.
Mm-hmm. And then at that moment, which seems like a very intense one, how did that translate into what you're doing professionally?
I let go of a lot of control and let myself be more of an observer while still executing on things, but kind of more being in the flow than imagining I can control every outcome, or that I can create security for myself, or create what I always call ground beneath my feet. That essentially, there's an amount of money or an amount of status or an amount of something that now I'm firmly planted. I'm safe and accepted that there's never any ground beneath our feet. We're never in this state of having everything under control, because there's so many things that could occur in a moment in time that would take that control away. And I think once I let go of that, it allowed my purpose to find itself rather than me have to go chasing it.
Mm-hmm. And was this in the context, did you end up in this time period quitting your job, or did you end up staying in your role? How did you did this all within navigating your same position?
I ended up being able to stay in the same firm, doing something very, very different. And I was open to any possibility. There was no, it's odd, because here was a moment in time when it would seem that everything I built and everything that I was crumbling. And yet it was the best I had ever felt. And it wasn't because I had some Schadenfreude, is that the word? Like for myself, that something bad should happen, not quite the contrary. It's that I saw the real possibility of being fulfilled.
Hmm. What did the shift look like?
It really was more just a pure journey of becoming mindful and just being present. And I think I spent a long time with that as my guide. Just be present, and that's it.
Mm.
Like there's no past, there's no future.
And you said internally your role changed. You went from legal work to something else because of this mindfulness shift?
To process. And that, when I look back on the time before it, so I say like there was 15 years or so. Actually, during that time, there were two things that I actually always enjoyed. And that was seeing patterns in things and understanding complex systems. And both of those require process. I know, Sam, you would say those are process, but I always kind of, see some distinction. But in realizing that that's what I enjoyed and that's what I thought I had an affinity to do, it just became a natural place for me to go.
Mm-hmm. So in this time period where you had a pretty big shift in consciousness and conscious perception, and then you also shifted more from legal work to process work, from that point in your life now to being at the business therapy table, I guess, where did your journey take you that you feel comfortable being able to share what you've been through and conscious and mindful advice with others in this arena?
I mean, I've spent the time at the table with some of the largest corporations in the world, and also startups, in understanding what their needs are and what they are looking to accomplish, albeit in a specific context, but then more broadly, seeing how they handle process and programs and the like, and spent over 10 years just focused on that area.
And now you're here to share. And how is your own journey going? I guess this is still part of it, but where would you say you're at after changing directions? Is your life feeling materially different?
My life is materially different. Relationships across the board. I think I'm much more fulfilled, and I'll say happy. Like that's not a word that I ever thought was should be someone's objective necessarily, because happy is like just an emotional state, as opposed to maybe being fulfilled or being present. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy.
And what advice would you give someone going through a similar journey that doesn't quite see the same things you're seeing or see the end of the tunnel yet?
It depends where they are in the journey. Like when I reflect on things, and I think this goes for business therapy, for process work, for everything. There's only so many messages that a person's able to consume or receive in a given moment in time. So I think if somebody would have, I think that moment of mindfulness and the way I found it, I think that anything to do with meditation and mindfulness is just a wonderful, wonderful place to start. But I'd be hesitant to give a one size fits all, depending on where someone is in that arc and what else is going on. So like, as an example, Sam, so when we started working together back in the day, you had a strong idea of just stop, not doing something if it doesn't make sense from adding value perspective, regardless of whether or not, perceptions or politics might indicate that was something that should be done. I knew that was right at the time. I probably wasn't ready to fully embrace it, having been schooled in how systems currently work in most institutions, and so I would say that just mindfulness, is really the base for pretty much anything you want to do in life.
Great. Well, I think I'm at the end of my questions. Do you have anything else that you want to share about your journey from your where you started your career to how you've come to business therapy that I might have missed?
The only thing I would say is that everyone believes with all their heart that if they take actions A, B, C, that is likely to result in X, whatever it is for them. And it's all a lie, because you have no idea whether or not A, you'll even want X, so like you're going for it. But B, you can never control a result. You can only control what you do, and everything else is whatever happens. And being comfortable with that dynamic, I think liberates people from catastrophic consequences for themselves.
That's a great closing thought. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to you, figuratively speaking, and you can give me the rundown.
So in your journey, starting out, you had a phase one, I guess, or what I was calling phase one. Why don't you describe that?
Yeah, my phase one, it was a shorter, and I also didn't achieve as much of success. So you could say those are probably related, but it was about 8 years. And I started fairly directionless too after my undergraduate, where I studied biology and psychology. So I was a med school hopeful. And then I decided that it wasn't a good path for me when I was getting into the process. And then I had no other direction. So I went and I started just chasing income, and similar to your experience, chasing the objectives that everyone puts in front of people, young people who are otherwise rudderless, which is try to apply your skills, make money, stand on your own 2 feet, keep improving and keep hustling, basically. And for me, that was very much a game of who would give me a job as a biology degree person. And then I just kind of went from there. So I actually took some odd jobs, and then I went into water treatment, which I really enjoyed. And I was a field engineer for several years. And that, I would say, is my first substantive career move. And in that role, I was exposed to process. And this is in my early 20s, because I was out there doing chemical and mechanical process work. And I found it very fascinating. I found that it matched my personality very well. And I liked working with systems. I liked it. So it was the first, and it was very unconscious, I'd say, but it was the first thing that really fell into place, even at a subconscious level, which was that this is something I really enjoy. Like I could get into a flow doing this more so than anything else I'd been exposed to in the working world. And in order to continue checking boxes, I did go back in my early 20s for my MBA. So I think I was about 24 when I decided to go back to school. And at that time, I took a job for an insurance company doing process engineering, because I was looking for jobs that could help me stabilize with school, because I was doing field engineering. I was traveling all over the place. Sometimes I'd be 3 weeks on site, 1 week home. So it was impossible to join a school program. So I took a basic process engineering position, and I started to figure out what it was meant to do process work for digital services. And at that time, I started to have some burgeoning awareness that it really was a new frontier, and that a lot of the tools from Lean and Six Sigma that we were learning were not really applicable to the new digital world or digital services generally. So in that time period in my life, I was taking part-time night classes to get my MBA, and it was supposed to be a 2-year program, but because I was consulting and I was doing a lot of the work to pay for school, it took me 4 years. So from 24 to 28, I was doing my MBA, I was traveling, and I was doing process consulting for this insurance company.
How are the other aspects of your life playing out?
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just telling my life story. I was supposed to be describing phase one. So phase one, just to be clear, it ends at the end of this 4-year stint when I get my degree. So, and that answers the question you were saying. In the background, I had was engaged and married my college sweetheart, and I was checking boxes, and my personal life, my professional life were great as far as I was concerned. I was making good money. I was getting raises year over year. I was getting my education. I was married to somebody who I very much was in love with at the time. And everything was good. And then right towards the end of that phase one, where career was going well, I was about to graduate, my personal life started falling apart, and my marriage deteriorated very quickly. It just, I think looking back, I'll summarize it as there's an acknowledgement of not being mindful, in the sense that I was checking all these boxes, and on paper I was the perfect husband and the perfect provider, and I was getting ready to, enable like a really great family, but we weren't really emotionally connected, and we were living separate lives. And by the time I had realized that, or some awareness crept in, it was really too late to reconcile in some ways, and that fell apart very, very violently and very quickly, actually, kind of out of left field. So
What's the difference though between, so you were doing some process work, during that time, which is something obviously you enjoy. What's the difference between doing activity mindfully or doing activity not mindfully, if qualitatively they seem to be the same activity? So like, had you been mindful, you might have ended up doing, being a field engineer, which you like doing, and the like. So what's, how do you characterize the difference?
I think there's two tracks that were happening in my life, and why my journey might be a little unique compared to some, because there was a part of my life where I was aggressively checking boxes, trying to fill out a template, trying to get like marriage, secondary degree, great job, all in order. And that was happening, and that was kind of my primary focus. Now in the as part of that, finding process work, which I think is an actual conscious alignment for me, happened accidentally. And I think there was a lot of subconscious behavior driving me towards finding that. And honestly, when you're lucky enough to fall into something that you have a true passion for, then checking all the boxes becomes easier because you have this alignment. But I would say in this phase one, we'll call it, period, where I was just working and I was just chasing success in the very conventional way. There was no consciousness attached to it. It was just by happenstance that I started to attach myself to work that I found very fulfilling and enjoyable.
And what was the shift and what caused it?
The shift for me was my violent, and it's just a large extent unexpected divorce, which shattered my sense of control. And it was one of those things where when you think everything's going well, and kind of what you described in your background too, where you're in control, you're, hands on the wheel and everything is going your way, to have like a major part of that come out from under you. And kind of like you said, you had a relationship end too around that time. I had a major relationship end, and it really throws everything into question. And for me, I was actually enjoying my professional journey. And part of the problem was I was enjoying it so much, I think it came at the detriment of paying attention to some of the things going on in my personal life. But it was tough. I mean, and that can be tough for a lot of people. I mean, this is my first major relationship, I guess you could say. And when it fell apart, you question everything. I mean, you question all the success that you had. I mean, how successful can you be if, the big part of your life is falling apart in the background and you have no control over it? So I think at that moment, there's a lot of reflection on self-awareness. And I think that's where the light of consciousness can really creep into somebody's life. And they say that a lot, where things really start to fall apart. You have a window to look at everything as an observer and say, what's happening to me? Why is this happening to me? What led me to this point in time? And I think I really had that moment, but I didn't really have that moment until maybe a year later. So that happened. And to answer directly, I was ready to get back on the horse and restart and rebuild everything. And I said, I'm moving to New York City. I have this new fancy degree. I'm single. Everything's going well. That was a snafu. And then I moved to New York to kind of start what became a strong phase two towards a conscious living approach. And that's when I guess I'll just finish the thought. I got to New York and I tried to start rebuilding the same way I built the first time. And I was finding it incredibly painful. And I think after having pushed so hard for so many months or years really, and then trying to rebuild, I realized that I didn't want to. And that was a very conflicting feeling. When you start to have an awareness that, hey, this I was able to do it the first time because I felt like it was what I needed to do, and I was winning, but to have to go through it again while simultaneously interrogating what the point was, it was becoming very, very tough. And like your Pima Chodron book, for me was, I just happened across my desk. I read A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. And that was the trigger point for me, where it was basically the first time somebody said, you don't have to do what you're doing. You can live a different life. You can slow down. You don't have to be in control of what happens to you. And it really sent me into a massive tailspin. I was kind of a mess for like 6 months as I was processing that. And then I would say something new was able to come out of that.
Yeah, I'll just echo just the idea of, I think a shift can only occur if you're willing to sit with it. If you're willing to sit with all that confusion and being unsettled without jumping to something that settles you, and without, numbing it, or, with alcohol or whatever, I think that is what enables a real realignment. So,
Go ahead.
The next scene, how far was it from then until you wrote your book?
So that was still 3 or 4 years after. I guess I got to the city in 2015, and I published my book toward the end of 2018. So it was about 3 years, I guess. And, I will say, when I had this shift and I had some stark realizations about what it means to be mindful, what it means to be present, and what that actually means to my life, it wasn't something that happened in a day. I mean, I had no other way to live. I had no idea how to live. It's easy to read a book or have somebody explain something to you. And like you were saying, you can only download so much at one time and realize, well, if I actually had to apply this to everything I did or every process that I had in place, I would be living a different life. I would be in a different place. I often remember in the beginning, when I was paying more than I could afford to live in Midtown Manhattan, after I'd had some of these realizations, it's like waking up one day and being trapped in the middle of the city and asking, why am I here? Why did I come here? What am I doing? But it takes a while to unbury yourself from past decisions. So it's not like an overnight thing. I mean, I remember I had friends who were very much living their normal life. So I had to process these changes and these changes in consciousness while balancing having, my existing social life. I had to work, I had to do the things, and it's easy to remain in old patterns when you've spent your entire career, your entire life, basically living them out. So to think you could change them overnight is really tough. And I think for a lot of people, you can read something and acknowledge the truth in it, but then to turn it back and actually integrate it in all your processes is very difficult. So yeah, it took me probably 18 months to 2 years of personal and professional challenge and tension to continue studying, reading, applying day by day. And then suddenly you find yourself in a place where I was out of the city and my choices were taking me in random directions. And I found myself having so many thoughts and experiences. I had to codify them somewhere. And I just started writing, and I wrote an outline. I just wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And then I ended up with this book. I know that's a short version, but that's kind of.
Tell us a little bit about the book. Tell us a little bit about the book itself.
So the book is titled Becoming a Conscious Business. And it was really the reflections kind of that we're talking about here on my personal life and my professional life in the intersection of consciousness and how it manifested through me and what I wanted to do with business and what I wanted to share with our process work. And it was my way. I had so many thoughts and observations looking through life through a lens of consciousness that I didn't see it anywhere. And I just had to start organizing my thoughts. And that's really what the book goes over. It goes over the patterns. And it's funny, you talk about how you were attracted to complex patterns and identifying and working with them. I was trying to identify a pattern and articulate it into existence that I knew from studying biology, that I knew through living my life, that I knew through studying, mindfulness, through studying business. There was a grand pattern, a grand thought that unified all of these experiences that I had. And it was more than I could just articulate out of thin air. And that is really what the book is. It's really the discussion and the articulation of this great process pattern that I saw in life and tried to get it on paper. And that's what the book represents. Like how we as humans became to this point and how businesses are really an extension of our consciousness. And that's what the book is about largely.
And where are you now in your journey?
So it didn't really slow down. After I wrote the book, I continued to study and I continued to push myself personally and professionally to study how process and mindfulness and consciousness are really productively permeate everything that we do as humans. And in that, similar to you, but maybe a different path, you realize that control is not something that we can afford the illusion of. and that our life, if we're following what we need to be doing when we need to be doing it, it takes its own path and it goes its own direction. And my life, you could say, is probably an example of that, where I left New York City. I didn't really have a destination. I've slowly been traveling the country, traveling the world, trying to collate different professional experiences, try to understand everything that I'm processing, that I'm going through. And I find myself here at the business therapy table today as one part of a journey that's still very actively I'm engaged in, trying to figure out how to bring this passion for business, this passion for mindful business into the world through different projects, through different solutions, through these conversations we have. And all I can tell you is I don't know where it's going. I don't know where it's leading me, but I'm just here for it and trying to follow my instincts at every turn. But I will say too, where I am is very fulfilled. Like you, I've never had less direction. Not like you. I'm leading up. I'm more fulfilled like you. But personally, I've never had less direction, less plans in place, less boxes that need to be checking. And I feel great. And I feel productive and I feel high powered. I can't tell you where I'm going to be next year. I can't really tell you where I'm going to be next month, physically or professionally. But it's been really fantastic. And I'm trying to figure out how I can share that with other people. And that's where you and I meet every week to talk business therapy.
And I would definitely say similarly, by letting go of all the things that I think people think will lead to productivity, by letting all that go, I can speak for myself. I can accomplish far more now in a shorter period of time than before, because I'm not spending so much of my energy on the things I can't control.
Yeah, it does make a big difference for productivity, and it gives you clarity of how the process that, like, I just started to get more clarity about how all processes work. And that's what I think I like to share here on the show. And I think largely, to bring it back to how do we get here to business therapy and what do we hope for people tuning into the podcast? We hope to just have authentic conversations just like this one, where we can share our experience and we can share the learnings in ways that are practical. I think a lot of conversations in the space of mindfulness, and when you talk about mindful business, there's not a true pragmatic intersection where we look at productivity, we look at metrics, we look at results, and we understand them from a lens of how the principles of mindfulness make them to be the most productive they can be. And it's the same in your personal life, and it's the same in everything. And I think if I said, what do we hope from tuning in the podcast? I hope we have a good time learning as we learn through teaching, we learn through speaking it ourselves, we learn through guests who bring real problems onto the show. And that's my take, which is that I hope everyone can just enjoy authentic conversations and we can all get a little closer together and talk about conscious business topics.
And I hope that in addition to what Sam said, I hope that people are able to spend more of their time adding value and being part of value creation and less time on wasteful activity. And one of the things that I think both Sam and I have spent a lot of time on is seeing the mechanics of what leads to a positive outcome and what doesn't. And it's predictable, it's highly predictable and universal. So when we are approaching any kind of problem in the business or personal space, it's through a universal lens. And that lens you'll see is highly repetitive in the things that we speak to, and again with the aim of adding of people being able to be part of things that add value.
I think that's a great point to end on. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you next week at Business Therapy.